Good evening. Tonight's story is called I Saw Something on the Evening News That I Can't Explain. Let's begin. My work friends and I were out at our favorite pub last night. Not a really fancy place, but cheap beer and close enough to home that I don't have to drive. The night started out normally enough. The four of us crammed into a small table off into the corner, mostly talking shop and shitting on our bosses. Being this was the middle of the week, there weren't too many other people around. Maybe around 8 or 9 others in the whole place. Everybody just kind of keeping to themselves. Sort of people you'd expect to see in a pub on a Wednesday. Anyway, from where I was sitting, I have a pretty good view of the TV behind the bar. Jesse the bartender is kind of lazily flipping through the channels and passes by our local news channel. There's a brief burst of orange and red on the screen, which I register as a fire happening somewhere, which then disappears as Jesse switches over to the next channel. Something about the image looks oddly familiar, though. "Hey, Jess, can you switch that back?" I call out to her. The news comes back on, and suddenly I recognize the building in the frame. It's my building, and it's burning. Holy shit. I say loudly enough that a few people follow my gaze to the television. "That's my apartment!" The crowd in the bar falls kind of quiet. Everybody's staring up at the screen now. The screen shows a wide shot of the outside of my building. The camera must be set up on the north end of the block because I recognize a lot of shops on the ground floor. Property management, dry cleaner, convenience mart, etc. The top left corner of the building is aflame. It's not a huge fire by any means, but it looks like a few units between the top 4 floors or so have already been engulfed by the flames. Jesus, man, one of my co-workers says. That sucks. There's an uncomfortable murmur of agreement that passes around the table. I mean, I don't blame them. I wouldn't know what to say in this situation either. Yup. I agree, just as awkwardly. Thankfully, my apartment is only halfway up and located on the west side of the building. I cross my fingers, hoping my stuff will be okay. The camera cuts to a reporter on the scene. He's standing a little further away, looking at the shops in the background. I can tell he's across the street on the northwest corner of the building. "Firefighters are expected on the scene at any moment," he's saying, "and hopefully they'll be able to contain this horrible inferno before it spreads any further." As I was saying before, it's very fortunate that everyone was able to evacuate the building before things got too bad, or who knows what tragic events may have unfolded. "He's really laying it on thick," my other co-worker jokes. I chuckle a bit. All things considered, at the moment it really didn't seem all that bad. But then, a few moments later, hang on. The reporter on the TV says, "We're getting some update information. It seems..." Hang on one moment. While we readjust the camera, the previously locked down camera starts to shift, the angle focusing on the area of the building about halfway up the west side. All the lights in the building are out except for one. I feel a weird creeping sensation as I start counting the windows from the bottom. 5 up, 2 over, that's my place. I swore I turned that light out, I think at first, then I see it. There's a person standing in my window. The camera is zoomed out too far to make out any features, but it definitely looks like a man, and it's definitely standing in my apartment. I watch petrified as the camera zooms in closer. The reporter babbling on about the overlooked, ill-fated soul still trapped in the blazing such and such. As the image gets closer, I start to make out more details. The person is dancing, or something. I don't really know how to describe it, but he's moving around a lot, and everything he's doing has this bizarre rhythmic quality to it. He starts waving his arms in the air back and forth, then he's waving them up and down at the sides, then he's banging both fists on the glass, then he's waving his arms over his head again, back and forth. Everything he's doing is the exact same tempo. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. He starts jumping up and down, waving his arms over his head like he's trying to get someone's attention from a long distance. But everything is to the exact same rhythm, over and over again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. What in the fuck? I say, my voice a hoarse whisper, and then the camera gets a little closer, and we finally can make out the person's features. It looks exactly like me. It's wearing the same clothes that I'm wearing right now. Clothes I changed into moments before leaving the apartment earlier. Its face looks almost exactly like mine as well, except for its eyes. Its eyes are far too big for a normal person. It has this most almost comical look of horror on its face. I don't even know how to describe it. Imagine if someone were pretending to look scared, but as a joke. It would have almost seemed funny if the circumstances were different, but instead it was just extremely unnerving. No one in the bar is talking now. Everyone is fixed on the TV. The person is still swaying and waving around, beating its hands on the glass or jumping in circles. I almost don't hear the reporter mention the fact that firefighters have rushed into the building and are now heading to my floor. Oh God, I think, without really understanding what was happening. Please don't go in there. I stared transfixed at the screen. From this angle, you can barely see at the top of my floor door through the window. Not too far behind where this creature is flailing around. Right now, it is holding its face in its hand and shaking its head from side to side, as if saying no. Suddenly, the door behind it bursts open, as presumably the firefighters have entered my apartment. The creature stops moving. For a second, I see its expression change. The comical look of horror is gone, replaced by a huge smile filled with enormous pointing teeth. Then the lights go out. We all sat there, staring at the screen as the camera slowly zoomed out from the now dark window. No one says anything as we all quietly pay our bill and leave. I went directly to my sister's place across town and asked to stay with her. I told her there was a fire in my apartment and that's it. When I tried to find footage from the news online later that night, it seemed like they had edited that last part out. I don't know if any of you on the subreddit know what that thing was, but I hope they didn't put out that fire. I hope they let the whole fucking place burn to the ground. Damn, that is kind of freaking scary. I hope you guys liked this one. I really did. It was definitely really creepy. I'll see you guys in the next one. Stay spooky. Bye.
Have y'all ever heard of the Moon-Eyed People? According to Cherokee lore, they live deep in the woods of present-day Appalachia. More specifically, North Carolina and Georgia. Blue-eyed and pale-skinned, they were so sensitive to light that they only emerged in the moonlight. So unlike the other beings that appear in indigenous legends, these were neither spirits nor monsters, but they were humans like the Cherokee themselves. As European settlers began to pour into North America in the 18th century, they began documenting the legend of the Moon-Eyed People. The Cherokee described this mysterious race of people as small, blue-eyed, or light-eyed with pale skin. And because of their sensitivity to light, they only emerged at night. In 1797, educator and American botanist Benjamin Smith Burton wrote, "The Cherokee tell us when they first arrived in the country in which they inhabit, they found it possessed by certain moon-eyed people who couldn't see in the daytime." In 1782, Cherokee Chief Aconostota also told the story about the moon-eyed people to Tennessee Governor John Sevier. Aconostota repeated the stories told to him by his ancestors that white man had long ago crossed the Great Water and had landed first near the mouth of the Alabama River near Mobile. Burton recorded that the Cherokee said that they had expelled those wretches. Legend goes that the Cherokee took advantage of the intolerance that the Moon-Eyed People had to light and attacked them during a very powerful full moon. The legend of the Moon-Eyed People is said to run parallel to another legend about a Welsh prince and his brother who allegedly decided to flee from Wales in, I think, 1170 because of a civil war that was happening between their brothers. It's said that the brothers allegedly landed in North America, where they established a settlement. Legend even goes that one of the brothers even returned to his country and brought more people back over with him. The brothers disappeared from historical record, but they were kept alive through Welsh stories and songs. So were these Welsh princes maybe ancestors of the Moon-Eyed People? Aconostota seemed to think so. He told Sevier that mysterious mounds in the area had been built by Welshmen. It's getting dark. I had to turn my flash on. Not only that, but some of these Welsh settlers were noticing some major similarities between what they were used to back in Wales and the indigenous cultures that they were experiencing here in the New World. They were seeing stone forts like their ancestors had built back in Wales. They noted that some of the indigenous people that they met had paler skin and blue eyes, and some of them even spoke a language that was really similar to their language. A local history museum in North Carolina claims to have a Moon-Eyed People artifact. The story goes that a 19th century farmer dug up a strange statue on his land, that appears to depict two people either standing close together or conjoined with flat faces. Whether or not if the statue depicts moon-eyed people or if it was made by them is unknown. A number of strange sites still exist along the Appalachian foothills that people believe could very well be traces of the moon-eyed people. One of those sites being Fort Mountain in Georgia. There remains traces of a once mighty wall that was 900 foot long, 12 foot thick, and 7 foot high in some places. And the walls bear a striking resemblance to European battlements. Sevier told a friend that the wall had been built by the Welsh, and that they had constructed it as protection from the ancestors of the Cherokee who had eventually drove them from the region. If the story of the wall being built by the moon-eyed people, the Welsh, is true though, that would mean that the two princes from the 12th century may not have had anything to do with it. Some historians estimate that the wall predates their arrival by hundreds of years. The legend of the moon-eyed people leaves more questions than answers. Were the Cherokee stories about the blue-eyed, pale skin, only emerged at night people a myth? Were the moon-eyed people Welsh? Or were they something different entirely? I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts. Local lore states that in certain portions along the crumbling wall of Fort Mountain, you can still hear distant drum beats and catch glimpses of men in bearskins. Perhaps the moon-eyed people are still around. I don't know. Let me know what y'all think.
Oh, this is the craziest scary story submission that has been sent in to me to date, y'all. You already know the drill. If you don't like spooky things, you don't like scary stories, paranormal, all that, go ahead and scroll. For those of you who are going to stay, buckle on up. This made me cry. Nothing has made me actually cry when reading it. The email reads, Casey, I would love for you to share my story on your page. Just please don't use my real name. This happened in Florence, Oregon, and I've never told this story publicly before. My husband and I bought our house 4 years ago. It wasn't some creepy abandoned house or anything like that. It was actually really pretty, older, surrounded by huge trees, a little neglected, but nothing that scared me. The weird thing was that I wanted it before I even saw the whole thing. I remember our realtor opening the front door and I walked straight past her into the kitchen and it felt like I already knew where I was going. She actually laughed and said, well, I guess you found the kitchen. I laughed too, but I hadn't noticed what I'd done till she said it. The entire time we walked through the house, I had this feeling in my chest that I couldn't explain. Not fear, more like homesickness, which makes absolutely no sense when you're standing somewhere you've never seen before. There were other little things. I knew the linen closet upstairs was going to stick before I opened it. I knew there was a window behind a boarded up section of the attic. The first night that we slept there, I woke up around 3 a.m. and walked downstairs without turning on any lights. My husband found me standing in the kitchen. He asked me what I was doing, and apparently I told him, I'm waiting for her to come home. I have no memory ever saying this. About a month after we moved in, I started to smell perfume. It was always in the same places, bottom of the stairs, the upstairs hallway, and right next to my side of the bed. It's like an old-fashioned kind of smell. Reminded me of roses mixed with baby powder. Then I started to find things moved. Nothing too dramatic. A cabinet left open here or there, a chair pulled away from the kitchen table, a bedroom door I knew I had closed. Once I came home from work and I found an old music box sitting in the middle of our kitchen counter. I'd never seen it before. My husband hadn't either. We figured it must have been left somewhere in the house by the previous owner and one of us had just found it and forgotten about it, except neither of us had. So we put it in the attic. 2 days later, it was back downstairs. That's when we started joking around saying that we had a ghost. About a year after buying the house, we finally renovated the attic. There was this section along the back wall where the floor was raised slightly. When my husband pulled up the old boards, he found a little metal box wedged underneath. There were photographs inside, maybe about 20 of them. A family standing in the backyard, Christmas morning in our living room, a little girl sitting on the staircase, people cooking in our kitchen. It was unsettling seeing strangers living their lives inside the rooms that were now ours, but there was one woman who appeared in almost every picture, and I couldn't stop looking at her. She wasn't somebody I recognized, but something about her face made me uncomfortable. Not because she looked scary, but because it felt familiar. I put the photographs away, but a few weeks later, I saw her standing at the top of my stairs. I don't mean I thought I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I saw a woman. She was wearing a light-colored nightgown, one hand resting on the railing, and we looked directly at each other. This is the part that still bothers me. I wasn't scared. I started crying. She disappeared before I reached the stairs. Now here's the part I have a hard time explaining. I was adopted. I've known that my entire life. I had a good childhood and I never seriously searched for my biological family, but after I turned 30, curiosity got the better of me and I did one of those ancestry DNA tests. Months went by, and then I matched with a woman who turned out to be related to my biological mother. We started talking, Eventually, I asked if she had any pictures of her. She sent me one. It was the woman from my attic. I called my husband into the room and showed him without saying anything. He immediately said, "That's the woman from the pictures." I asked my biological relative where my mother had lived. She told me she wasn't sure of the exact address anymore, but she remembered the street. My street. I sent her a picture of my house. She called me almost immediately. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. This was my biological mother's house. I had somehow bought the house she lived in after giving me up for adoption. She told me my biological mother had died here, in this house, in the upstairs bedroom that is now my bedroom. I asked the previous owners if they knew anything about her. They didn't. The house had changed hands more than once since she had passed. There was no logical reason I would have known this place. No reason I would have known about the hidden window. No reason I would have known my way through the house in the dark. I eventually told my biological relative about the perfume, roses, and baby powder. She started crying again. That was apparently what my mother always smelled like. I haven't seen the woman at the top of the stairs since I learned who she was, but every once in a while, usually when I'm having a really bad day, I'll smell that perfume beside me. And this is going to sound strange, but I've stopped thinking of this as the house I bought. Sometimes I wonder if this house was waiting for me to come back, because apparently before my biological mother died, she told her sister there was one thing she regretted more than anything. She wished she could have brought her daughter home. I just don't think either of them knew that one day I would find my own way back. Look at my goosebumps. Girl, first of all, thank you for sharing your story. You need to write a book. You need to write a book. That shit is insane. That is insane. This is like the least scary story that's been sent to me, but like the most touching and shockingly insane. Like the odds of that happening are like slim to none. That's incredible. The tie that you and your biological mother have to have spiritually has to be so strong. I'm like at a loss of words. That was beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that with me. If you want to submit your own scary story for a chance for me to read it on my page, you can go ahead and send it to the email that is listed above. If you're new here and you love spooky stories, on this page I talk about my own personal experiences with the paranormal, as well as sharing other people's real life experiences that they submit. So if you want to follow along on the journey, you're more than welcome to. As always, thank you for watching. Love you, bye.
A friend of mine inherited an old cottage in the Scottish Highlands after her uncle passed away. He'd left it to her in his will. It wasn't worth much, but it had been in the family for years. It was a little ramshackle, hidden away in the middle of nowhere, and had always been used as a quiet bolt hole for friends and relatives. Her uncle had lived there for most of his life before moving into a care home, after which the cottage was only visited occasionally by family. A few months after his death, she and her husband made the long drive north. They planned to stay for a week, clear the place out, see what repairs it needed, and decide whether to keep it or maybe turn it into an Airbnb, or just simply sell it. When they arrived, everything seemed perfectly normal. The cottage was dusty from sitting empty, but otherwise exactly as they'd expected. It had 2 bedrooms, a small living room with an old fireplace, a tiny kitchen, a bathroom downstairs, a little study, an old coal cellar beneath part of the house, and a shed attached to the side. They'd spend most of the day sorting through old belongings before heading out for a walk. Being deep in the Highlands, there was nothing nearby for miles. They'd brought food and wine with them, so after their walk, they spent the evening eating, drinking by the fire, and chatting. They both admitted the place felt a little creepy, but only in the way old, empty houses often do. It didn't feel haunted, just forgotten. Eventually, they went to bed. Sometime during the night, my friend woke, needing the bathroom. Since it was downstairs, she quietly made her way through the dark house, trying not to wake her husband. She was sitting on the toilet, and she happened to glance down at the old wooden floorboards. One of the knots in the wood blinked. She frowned, thinking her tired eyes were playing tricks on her. Then it blinked again. It's so vile. It took a second for her brain to process what she was actually looking at. It wasn't a knot in the floor at all.
My gosh.
It was a small hole between the floorboards, and an eye was staring up at her through it. She screamed, ran upstairs, and woke her husband. He grabbed a torch and went straight down to the bathroom. There was the hole, exactly where she'd said it was, but there was no eye. He searched around but found nothing, eventually convincing her she'd been half asleep and had imagined it. Shaken, they somehow managed to get back to bed. The next morning, wanting to put her mind at ease, he decided he'd fix the hole. When he looked underneath the bathroom, he realised it was directly above the old coal cellar. He unlocked the cellar and climbed down. In one corner was a sleeping bag.
Oh, rough.
Scattered around it were food wrappers, empty drink bottles, cigarette ends, and other belongings. There was no doubt someone had been living down there. Not years ago, recently. Possibly while they had been sleeping upstairs. They called the police immediately, but by the time officers arrived, there was nobody there. They searched the property, but couldn't find anyone. And without knowing who had been staying there, there was little they could do. The couple stayed one final night, but only after buying heavy-duty padlocks for the cellar entrance. Not because they felt safe, because they couldn't face driving all the way home in the middle of the night. They sold the cottage not long afterwards, and to this day, my friend is adamant she knows what she saw. She wasn't looking at a knot in the floor. Someone had been looking back at her.
Oh, gosh.
Oh,
That is...
no!
That's horrible.
Is it the man from Japan?
The person that sent me the story called it, I still don't know. What don't you know? By the way, if you have a story that you'd like to share with our community about glitches in the Matrix, dreams, aliens, cryptids, or the paranormal, you can send it to this email address. And remember, we believe you. Hi, Indie Matrix. Hi! I was just thinking of something that happened to me while living in Denmark, and then one of your videos showed up in my feed. I haven't seen one in forever, so it prompted me to share this with you. Whoop, whoop. Something really out there happened. I was 18 years old, and I moved there with my fiance since his whole family decided to move back. One summer afternoon, we got into a terrible fight. I went out into the tiny roof of my bedroom window to smoke a cigarette and cry my eyes out and get some fresh air and some space so I didn't say something that I couldn't take back. The sky was starting to cloud over a bit as I tried to calm down. Pee-wee, my fiance's cat, followed me out there, crawled into my lap, and comforted me. I love kitties. He let me bury my face in his belly as I cried. When I finally looked up, the sky was considerably darker. I wasn't wearing my glasses, but when I looked up, it didn't look like clouds anymore. The darkness went all the way to the horizon, and I could sort of see ornate blue lights. Pee-wee nonchalantly crawled back in the window. I blinked and squinted, trying to see what I was looking at, and suddenly, I was in a white room. It was bright, but not burning my eyes bright, even though I was in a much darker scenario moments ago. There was nothing but white light. It was incredibly comforting. Okay, that's nice because it sounds not comforting, it sounds scary. I had a moment to think about what I was feeling, and I realized that I wasn't standing or sitting. I felt nothing touching me. I couldn't feel the weight of my body pressing down on any part of me. It was as if I was floating. I couldn't tell up from down. That would give me frickin' anxiety. A few moments later, I was back on the roof, and it was pitch black outside. My fiance was in our bed and jumped to his feet when I crawled back inside. He yelled at me for being gone so long. From my perspective, it was maybe 15 minutes from the time I crawled out onto the roof to crawling back inside. He told me that he and his family were looking for me everywhere, that they went into town and searched. It was 1997 and I didn't have a cell phone, so I suppose they figured that they would just find me in town, even though I barely knew my way around yet. They came back home less than 20 minutes before I came back in through the window. He thought I was messing with him. I told him to look out there for a ladder. How would I get down and back up without one? He watched me go out and he watched me come back in. There was no ladder. I thought he was messing with me, but the pitch black sky was impossible to ignore as it didn't get fully dark until midnight that time of year. I went out on the roof about 1:45/2 o'clock p.m. I was missing for 10 hours. And I still have no explanation that makes any sense. Fast forward to about 2 years ago, my sister became a level 2 QHHT facilitator, and I had a session with her and asked her what that was. My higher self said, we took her somewhere so that she could remember that there are bigger things in the universe than a petty little fight. Then we forgot to condense time and put her back to when we took her. What? Excuse me, what? Oh my God, I literally just said what? And then literally written in here, it says, the person that wrote it says, excuse me, what? Unfortunately, I'm even more confused after that. Who is we? And where did I go? When my sister pressed further, my higher self assured her that it wasn't ETs, but I genuinely wish that it was. Somehow that's more comforting to me than anything else that I could come up with. Thank you for listening. Okay, because friends, I was 1000% sure that this was ETs. I was like, the thing you saw in the sky was a UFO. Then they took you into the ship. I don't know why you weren't in a ship or like in a room, and I don't know why you were floating and it was all white around you, but whatever. Then they returned you and it was 10 motherfucking hours later. because that's a thing that happens. But that's not what it was. We took her somewhere so that she could remember there are bigger things in the universe. What did you remember? But you didn't remember that. You literally, it's not like they took you and they showed you. It wasn't like fucking Ghost of Christmas Past, Christmas Carol, whatever the fuck. And they took you somewhere else to show you like something to be like, look at this. Your little fight's not as big as this. They showed you nothing. You were just in a white fucking room. You were just floating in a white room. And then you were back like 2 seconds later. And what do you mean they forgot to condense time? What? Does anybody have an idea about this? Because I am lost now. I don't know, but this was crazy. Thank you so much for sharing.
The story that I'm about to tell you has like one of my biggest fears in it, which is drowning. And I will never understand why people go into the water where you like can't reach the bottom when you don't know how to swim. Luckily, the kid in the story did drown. Wait, luckily he did drown, bitch. No, luckily he was saved. He drowned. Just listen to the story. So this happened when this kid was around 10 years old, and he remembers that his mom would make tortillas to sell, and it was basically his job to go and get some wood for the fire. Him being sent to get wood for the fire was something normal. It was a routine. It was something that he was in charge of. So one day when he was going in between the trees to gather wood, he ran into his friends, and they tell him that they're about to go to the river and asked if he wanted to come with them. He said no because his mom would never give him permission to go and play in the river, but his friends convinced them to go. When they got to the river, they got into the water, and of course he could reach at the edge of it, so they were having fun playing. He didn't know how to swim, but he obviously wanted to have fun with his friends, and that's when they started to play chicken. He was the one on top of his friend's shoulders. They were pushing each other. They were all laughing and having a good time. It was all fun and games until the person he was on top of lost the balance, and they both fell into the water, and he couldn't reach the ground. Like, it was too deep where he was falling into. The kid that he had been on top of did know how to swim, but he obviously didn't, and he was trying to get a hold of him, but the kid ended up kicking him away because he was gonna drown the other kid as well. He started going deeper and deeper into the water. He just remembers being very desperate to get out of there. He was swinging. He was trying to find a branch, to find a friend, someone that could help him get up. Nothing was happening. He was just drowning. He just remembers drinking the water, taking it in. He said his ears started to feel really weird, and then out of nowhere, there was no sound. There was nothing. Everything just stopped. In this moment where everything stopped, nothing was hurting. He wasn't desperately trying to fight for his life. It was almost as if everything was very calm. That was a moment where he remembers feeling the sensation of leaving his body and almost going up to the surface. Out of nowhere, he was standing on the edge of the river looking down at where he was drowning, and he can see himself underneath the water. He couldn't hear anything, but he also couldn't feel hot. He couldn't feel cold. It was just like nothing. The only thing he could do was stand there on the edge, seeing himself under that water. Out of nowhere, he almost feels like a pull. Something pulls him back into the water, and he re-enters his body. He felt like he was almost like a spirit. He remembers entering his body again. He opens his eyes. He's underwater. Everything is dirty, and it's almost like he passed out again. And when he came back to, he was already outside of the water on the edge of the river, and one of his friends was putting pressure on his stomach, and that is when he starts spitting out water. He remembers coughing and vomiting, and he just tried to breathe again, and he stood up as soon as he was able to breathe. When he finally stood up, he looks at his friends and he tells them, "I want to go home." All of his friends were so scared. They each started picking up all the wood that he had, and he gave it to them, and basically they didn't want the mom to find out what had happened in that river. He explains that after this happened, he just felt really weird, like he didn't feel like himself. And he did not tell his mom or anybody what had happened that day. He kept it to himself, and obviously his friends did too. But what came after he lived through this was really, really weird. He started to see things that normal people wouldn't see, or things that he had never seen before this happened. They would tell him that he went crazy, that he was having hallucinations, but he knew that that wasn't the case. What he now sees is almost like a spiritual world that moves alongside our world. Angels, shadows, spirits. Sometimes he would see beings that had a lot of light, that they brought a lot of calm in him, But at the same note, he would see the complete opposite. He would explain these like bad beings, like they would be hiding in corners and staring at people like without blinking. He could feel how bad these beings were, and he also explains how he even saw Jesus. He saw Jesus so clear, just like if he was seeing another normal person, and he said that he spoke with him. He has also seen the Virgin Mary. He explains how he's also seen angels. The peace that he felt when he saw these, like the angels and the Virgin Mary, is something that he cannot even explain. He felt that he was living in between two worlds. He tried to find help, and he first started going into different religions, but he found that people tried to use him and other people wanted to do exorcisms on him. No one helped him. He was never able to get the help that he wanted within these different groups, and he just ended up locking himself up in his room, and he would pray. And that's where he actually found a lot of peace, when he was alone, when he would start praying with himself and not other groups that were trying to make him do different things. He also said that he went to these people who were evangelistas and that they told him that he was a prophet. He says that that same night he went into his bedroom and he started praying, and he asked Jesus if he was a prophet. He explains that Jesus actually responded to him and told him that he is not a prophet, that he is a messenger. Ever since that day, he understood that he is not crazy, that he is not making any of this up. He understands that he now has to live in between two worlds, and that is just his truth, whether people decide to believe him or not. But what do you guys think?
A series of spooky stories, unhinged mother-in-law. We went no contact with my grandmother after she called my daughter her first grandbaby in front of our oldest son. That's how he found out that he was adopted at 7. That deserves a roundhouse kick to the face. She told me that she had a hard time bonding with my son, her first grandchild, because he looked too much like me. They completely ignored him as he grew up. He's now 34, and when she recently died, I asked him if he was going to her funeral. He said, "I don't know this person." My ex-mother-in-law really wanted grandkids, and while camping, she brought it up. I let her know that we were waiting and I was on birth control. I explained the whole process of the birth control and how traumatizing it was, IUD, and she assured me that it was okay, she would just take it out when I was sleeping. We were sleeping in the same RV. My mother-in-law got gifted a package for family pictures for her birthday and begged us to be there, but didn't want me to be in the pictures because someday you guys might not work out. My husband and I had been together for 10 years and had a 6-month-old daughter at the time. What the fuck? Mine made a heartfelt video about her grandkids when she was fighting breast cancer. She included my son in it, but not my daughter, because she's not biologically my husband's, even though he adopted her and has been in her life since she was born. When I told her I was pregnant with my second son and last child, she said, 1, you're not going to have a daughter for me? I'm not having any children for you, you fucking weirdo. She has 3 sons, no daughters, and then followed it with, 2, just go to Vietnam for IVF so they can put a daughter in you. And then lastly said, 3, well, I'm not retiring for a grandson. I was only going to retire if it was a girl so I can watch her. There is no amount of therapy that could fix these fucking weirdos. I married her only good child. Her words. She got mad at me after I gave birth because the nurse took it upon herself to tell everyone that I didn't want anyone visiting me after birth. After we got married, she told us that it wouldn't even last a year. 12 years and counting. Told me my son will never be her favorite grandkid because I birthed him and it's not the same as her daughter birthing her children. Told me she didn't like me because I took away her only good child who was supposed to help her out after he got out of the military, but since we got married while he was still in, his focus is now on me and not her. The obsession with the sons has got to stop. We went no contact with her, my husband's choice, but I'm sure she'll say that it was because of me. My mother and father-in-law both blocked me, 19 now 20, and their son, 21 now 22, while being pregnant with their first grandchild. We found out his brother, 18, and his girlfriend, 16, were also now pregnant. Sorry? Obviously, we said that we would be there to support them as we were also having a baby. The in-laws told us that we had to grow up, get our own place, etc. When we found out, since they didn't want to parent another child and they admittedly said that they didn't want a baby in the house regularly, then counteracted with the younger brother saying that they could live there and they'd help and so on. We voiced how we didn't agree and they'd help should get the same response we got. We got blocked and told that we were terrible people. They want to be a part of our daughter's life, but I don't know how that's gonna work. I'm due in October. Well, it's not gonna work. I hate to break it to you. Because how are you going to tell me that you don't want to parent another child or you don't want another kid or a baby, whatever, in the house if it's y'all, but when it comes to the other brother, the baby brother, it's fine or it's okay? I don't think so. Come back for another part.
Another spooky scary story time submission about Denver International Airport and a very creepy passenger that a listener was seated next to. I think this is the second or third Denver International Airport story that we've covered on Spooky Scary Storytime, which, if you're new here, is the series of allegedly true listener-submitted experiences about the creepiest or most unsettling things that people have ever experienced. But this story came from Kate, and I changed her name because she flies a lot for work and didn't want to sound crazy. But Kate says that because she flies a lot for work, she is very well versed in flying, right? And she typically books the earliest flight possible to minimize her time at the airport. And she said she's also very familiar with the conspiracy theories that surround Denver International. That she knows all about the conspiracies about the murals, about the blue horse with the red eyes outside, and about the underground tunnels. But she always thought that those were just like internet folklore. She does not describe herself as a conspiracy theorist until this happened, right? So she said she got through security and grabbed coffee. She was at the airport pretty early. And as she was walking to her gate, she passed by one of the murals that everybody always talks about. Did not specify which mural it was or which terminal it's in, and I'm also not very familiar with the airport, so I couldn't tell you. But she said she was walking to her gate and she passes by this mural and she noticed that there was this man standing still. Even though the airport was mostly empty, typically when people move about an airport, they're coming and going, they're moving quickly. This man was just standing still, and he was standing sort of across the hallway from where the mural was, and he was just staring directly at it, and he was watching all of the people walk by the mural. She said she couldn't put her finger on it, but something about him just seemed off. Like, he wasn't looking at his phone. He didn't have any luggage with him. But the way that he was watching people and sort of smiling to himself just gave her the creeps. She said she actually remembers looking at the mural to see if there was anything glaringly obvious that he could have been smiling about, but she didn't notice anything out of the ordinary in the mural. So whatever. She walks by him. She goes to her gate, and very soon after that, boarding started. And she was seated in row 18, and she had the aisle seat, and she's sitting there for like 10-15 minutes while the rest of the passengers are boarding. And then she sees the man from the hallway, or like staring at the mural, get on the plane, and he walks to her row and he takes seat 18B, so the middle seat in her row. Again, she notices he has nothing with him. He has no phone. He has no luggage that he stored either underneath the seat or on his lap or in the overhead bins. He just sits down, and he doesn't even have AirPods or like headphones, nothing. And as the rest of the passengers boarded, he was watching everyone walk past their row very intently. And at one point, she said she remembers there was this mother with a toddler son who was like sleeping on the mother's shoulder. And she was like standing next to their row while they waited for the people behind them to be seated and store their luggage. And at one point, the sleeping child woke up and looked at the man, and then looked scared and buried his face in the mother's shoulder. And the man sitting next to Kate looked very disappointed that this happened. Once the little boy did that, the man stopped watching people board the plane and looked out the window. And then the flight attendants started their demonstration about emergency exit procedures and about wearing seatbelts properly. And Kate noticed that this passenger seated next to her was watching their demonstration very intently, like he was completely transfixed. And every time they would do something, like they would reach overhead to get the oxygen tank, or they would mimic putting on seatbelts, the man would copy their movements a few seconds later, like he was practicing doing it. And Kate assumed at this point that this must be this man's first time flying. This thought was sort of reinforced when the plane started taxiing, because the man looked very excited and he was leaning forward in his seat looking out the window. And at this point, there was another passenger seated in the window seat, but he sort of leaned forward to look out the window beyond this passenger. As they move down the runway, he sort of says quietly, "This is really something." And Kate kind of laughed, and she was like, "Oh, it's your first time flying?" And the man says, "Yes." And he leans back in his seat and he kind of quietly says to himself, or maybe Kate, "I can't believe we really did it." And Kate is sort of like, "Well, we've been flying for a long time." The man just says no. So Kate's like, "Okay, weird." And the plane actually took off. The man was excited again. He leaned forward. He was looking out the window. And as the city sort of disappeared beneath the plane, he even reached out and touched the window, and the city kind of gave way to the clouds, and he was very excited, and he looked at Kate and he said, "What are clouds made of?" And she was like, "I think just mostly water." And he said, "Oh, I'd assume it would be something heavier." She just sort of smiles at him because she's like, okay, this guy is like very excited about flying. I don't really know how to talk to him. And the man says, "They look different from above." It's like, okay. And he says, "Are you afraid of the sky?" And Kate's like, "I'm not, but some people are afraid of flying." And the man says, "No, not flying, the sky." And he points up. Kate didn't respond to this. The whole interaction was sort of giving her the creeps, and so she just put on her headphones and leaned back and closed her eyes. And she noticed that like the man had leaned forward again and was just looking out the window, and would even reach out periodically to touch the window, but it didn't seem to bother the passenger who was seated in the window seat. She didn't even react. Kate only took her headphones off when the flight attendant came by to ask if anyone needed a drink. She took her headphones out. She's like, no, I have water, thank you. And then she noticed that the flight attendant didn't actually ask the man seated next to her if he wanted anything, but he was still just like transfixed looking outside the window. So she thought maybe the flight attendant thought he was asleep or like didn't want anything. I don't know. So then she skips over him and she asks the person seated in the window seat if she wants something to drink, and that woman ordered like a coffee or something. Put her headphones back in, but was sort of watching the man at this point. She noticed that he didn't blink. What seemed to be even weirder to her is that he never adjusted his seat. He never reclined it. He was still sitting straight up and down in a very rigid manner. When the flight attendant came back to deliver the window passenger's coffee, he looked at Kate and he said, do you know how remarkable this is? And she said, the flight? And he said, no, never mind. At one point, sunlight came through the cabin and was like sort of on his hand, and he looked at it and mouthed something, and Kate took off her headphones and she said, what? And he said, it's warm. She said, I didn't expect it to be this beautiful. And she's like, okay, puts her headphones back in. So the flight ends, right? She stands up. Everybody in the row stands up. And the man stood up too, but there was like a delay. Like he watched everybody else do it before he also stood up. And there was obviously a backed up aisle as everyone grabbed their luggage from the overhead bins and was exiting the plane. It was obviously just very slow moving. So she reaches up to grab her luggage when it's her turn to exit the aisle. And she turns around to wish the man a good day, and she notices he's not there. She just sees the passenger that was sitting in the window seat, and she says there was no way this man could have slipped by her because she was standing in the aisle like blocking their row. She sort of says to the window passenger, like, how did he get out of here? And the window passenger looked very confused. She was like, who? Kate's like, the man that was sitting between us the entire flight. And the window passenger just looked very confused. She said, honey, there was nobody sitting next to us. This obviously made Kate feel crazy. She said she was looking frantically around the plane to explain this interaction that she had just had, and she has no history of mental illness. Nothing that could explain this entire conversation and experience that she had just witnessed for the last 4 hours. She says nothing strange has happened to her since, even though she has flown out of Denver International Airport since that day. The entire experience left her feeling crazy. She still wants to know if there's some logical explanation for the other woman not noticing that this man was seated next to them for the entirety of the flight. Otherwise, she says that she believes that some of the conspiracies about Denver International Airport are possibly true. Let her know your thoughts. Her name has been changed, but she will be seeing the comments. And if you have a story you think no one would believe, or something that you've been too afraid to share because you feel like you'll be called crazy, send it in. We would love to hear it.
A follower sent me this story a few weeks ago, and they had asked me to hide all their personal information because they don't want people trying to figure out who they are and really where they live. They said that this happened about 6 years ago while they were living deep in the mountains of Colorado. And after reading what they sent me, I don't think I'd ever go back out there at night ever again anyway. Now, they told me that this wasn't the first strange thing that they had encountered around their cabin. And over the years leading up, they'd found human-like footprints that would simply stop in the middle of untouched snow, miles from the nearest road. And they'd also noticed these long scratches carved into trees that were too high to be made by any person, but also too straight to look like something that was left by a bear or any other animal. And eventually they stopped questioning it until one winter night that changed everything. It was freezing outside, and the fire inside the cabin had almost completely burned out. They'd had no choice but to grab their axe, bundle up in the heavy snow gear, and head into the forest with a flashlight to go collect more firewood. Because the trees that were the closest to the cabin tended to be more wet, so they had to hike a little further than they liked to get some good firewood. The forest was completely silent on this night, just like it is every night. There was no wind, no birds, there was nothing. And after nearly 20 minutes of walking there, with their flashlight, they landed on something that was sticking out of the snow. And at first they assumed maybe it was like another bear track or some type of other animal track. And when they stepped a little closer, that's when they realized that it looked just like a human footprint, except it was enormous. The follower told me that it was bigger than their own head. And there was no second set of tracks anywhere nearby, just one massive footprint after another that was leading through the trees. And again, against their better judgment, they decided to follow these tracks out into the woods. The trail continued on for several hundred yards before reaching a small clearing, and then the footprints just literally stopped. They didn't fade out, it wasn't covered by snow. They just went gone. They went from being very obvious to being very obviously gone. as if whatever had made them literally just vanished or just jumped up into a tree and took off, and that was it. Every instinct in their body told them that they should probably leave, and now's a good time. So again, they went against their better judgment, and they continued to chop down as much firewood as they could carry. But the entire time that they were doing this, they couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was standing just beyond the tree line, watching every swing of the axe that they took. They never heard footsteps, they never saw movement, but they said that they have never felt fear like that ever before. They hurried back to the cabin, locked every door, built the fire back up, and they barely were able to go to sleep that night. By the next morning, they decided to prove themselves that they were maybe imagining it. They followed their own footprints back out towards the clearing, and that's when things became impossible, is what they said. Every single one of the giant footprints from the night before had entirely disappeared. Every single one of them, except for two. And these two prints were still sitting in the clearing, only a few feet from the exact spot where they had been standing while chopping the firewood that night before. It was as if whatever made them had been standing there just watching them. Being completely shaken from this, they turned around and they headed back toward the cabin. And when they reached home, they noticed one final footprint pressed into the snow directly beneath their bedroom window. And it was almost hidden beneath the fresh layer of snow. But unmistakably, it was there. And the email ended with him telling me that, they went out and they ended up buying a pew-pew the next day, and 6 years later, they still refused to sleep in those woods after dark. He said, call it paranoia if you want, but I know that I wasn't alone out there. So take it for what you will. They also attached a photo that they claim shows the footprint outside of their bedroom window, which I showed. So I'll let you decide if it was made up or did they really encounter something out there in those woods in Colorado. Let me know what you guys think in the comments.
I used to work in legal brothels, and one of the coolest things about starting at a new place is hearing all of the ghost stories. Now, most of these places have been around for like 30 plus years because it was really hard to get them started, especially back in the day because there was all this licensing and you'd have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars and do all these background checks, and they never wanted to have new ones open up. So the ones that had been there forever. And of course, like any workplace, stories have accumulated over time. Very rarely was it someone ever passing away on premises. Usually it was like a worker or a client had come, gone home, and then unfortunately passed on. But apparently their spirit had come back to the establishment. From what I could gather, most of the worker spirits were actually really, really friendly. Some of the client spirits, though, were really mischievous. Like apparently they would move the rubbers on you while you were doing the shebang, or even hide your undergarments. Or sometimes if you and the client were in the shower together, they would turn the water to like really cold or really hot. There was this one establishment I worked at in Sydney though, and it was huge. And it had this entire wing that not a single worker would go into. Like some workers would turn down heaps of bookings just because they would not use that wing and it was the only like rooms available. But I'm new, so they tell me all the stories. Apparently there was this worker who had done a shift, gone home, passed on, and her spirit came back and she was like either really nice or really like kind of rude and mean to you. It just depended if she liked you or not. So most workers just didn't want to deal with it and refused to use that wing. But it was the only room available. Everyone else was booked out. So I was like, that's fine. I'm not sure if I believe in that stuff anyway, so I'm gonna go book the room. Me and my client, we do our thing, really lovely. He leaves and I go back to the room and I cannot find the moolah. Cannot find it. I'm going through the sheets. I'm like looking under the bed. I'm running in and out. I go to the management. I'm like, do you see him on the cameras, like pocketing anything? Like the client, did I give the money to? I cannot find it. We're running around. I'm going through my bags. I'm like, what is going on? And then I go up to the room for one last check and there it is, just neatly folded and sitting on the bedside table. There is no way I could have missed that. And there's no way any other person had been in that room since I had left, because like there's CCTV and stuff and no one would enter that wing anyway. Like some of the managers would not go in there. So I fully believe that this spirit did it for me.
More spooky stories that I found in my TikTok comments. Let's go! Once my cousin called me when she was in a McDonald's play place. This was about 2023. Her siblings were eating, so she was the only one in the play place. And when she was crawling out to eat, I suddenly said, "Pamela, is someone with you?" She said no, but I swear to this day a little boy was right over her shoulder, and it disappeared when I looked again. When I was younger, myself and my sister were home alone. We were around 12 and 13 years old. One of the radios in the house started turning on by itself. The radio was in the room, which always had a freezing cold spot. We both went into the room multiple times to turn the radio off. It turned on again, so both of us decided to wait in the room to see what was causing it. To the side of us, we had one of those TVs with the big fat back, and the remote control for it was laid on top of it. A few minutes after we turned the radio off, the remote on top of the TV flew across the room and hit a wall. Parts of it shattered, and the batteries came out. We both ran downstairs and tried to build up the courage to go back into the room. 20 minutes later, we finally built up the courage and we went back into the bedroom. The remote was back on top of the TV, batteries inside, and no shattered edges. The radio also stayed off. I feel like that ghost just wanted to listen to the radio, but you both kept turning it off, so it got mad. It's maybe not that bad, but I remember when I was a little girl, I don't know what time it was, maybe something between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. Really don't remember, but my door suddenly opened just a little bit. My door was closed. The door handle literally went down. I waited for a few seconds and went to look, and no one was standing there. I went to my sister in my parents' room and everyone was sleeping. I told my mom about it after a few years or so, and she said it was probably her just checking on me. But she could have never opened my door and got that fast to her bedroom again. And why would she open the door just a bit without peeking in and then just leave? When she checked on me, she always scolded me for being up so late, and I still can't explain what happened. I'm 100% sure that the apartment I grew up in had a mimic. One time while my brother was getting ready for school in the morning, my father, who was sleeping in the living room next to the hallway, turned around and saw my brother's friend, who usually went to get my brother so they can walk to school together, standing beside his bed, smiling at him. He was weirded out because the living room doors were closed and he didn't hear the bell, but he just turned around and he pretended he didn't see him. He then heard the door outside open and close as my mother unlocked the door to let my brother leave. A few minutes after my brother left, the doorbell rang. It was his friend who was late to pick up my brother. He was never in the apartment before my brother left, and my father still has no idea who he saw. Yeah, that definitely sounds like a mimic. Around Halloween time last year, me and my partner built a camper and decided to settle down for the night at Halfren Forest Car Park, literally a car park in the middle of the woods. And I was sat on the seat by the window having a hot chocolate with the window side open about 11 p.m. I was taking pictures of the moon and stars because it was so beautiful. My partner was asleep, so I put the phone down and was admiring how beautiful it was. Then everything went really quiet, and I looked at the entrance of the car park and I saw something moving behind a tree. So I'm sat there with the window wide open, just staring at this thing moving to see if I can make out what it is. All of a sudden, something comes out behind the tree about 7 feet tall, extremely skinny and black with long arms, comes full on sprinting towards me. I slammed the window shut and fell off the chair and woke my partner up, and he told me he had a nightmare about a tall, black, skinny figure chasing him in the woods. I'll reply to myself with a picture I took moments before this happened. Okay, but this is actually a really pretty photo. Wow. As always, I love these stories, and you all really brought it with these most recent comments because they all really freaked me out. Okay, bye!
Something weird is going on at Taco Bell. And there are people who are reporting having these very strange, creepy experiences at Taco Bells across America. Now, there was this man named Jose. Jose said that him and a group of friends, they had went to this convention in El Paso. They were traveling down Interstate 20, headed towards Dallas, Texas. And he said they had been driving for a little over an hour when they started to get hungry. And so they began looking for somewhere to stop to get some food. We said they'd seen an exit for a nearby town, and they figured maybe this town has some restaurants. So they turn off the interstate and they start going down this back road. Well, it was just nothing but cornfields. But after about 5 minutes of driving, they were amazed because they see a sign for Taco Bell. And there is this brand new Taco Bell right in the middle of a bunch of cornfields. And it looked like it was completely new construction. So they pulled into the parking lot, which was freshly striped. And this building couldn't have been not even, a few weeks old. It looked very, very new. So they park their vehicle and they get out of the car and they go to the front door. We said as soon as they open the door and they go inside, they notice all of these people sitting down. And they all get out of their chair and they go up to Jose and his friends. And they start saying to him, welcome, welcome, like, and they started to greet him. And they knew all of their names. And Jose and his friends, they're like, confused because they're like, we've never been to this part of town. Like, no one should know who we are. But he said, like, everyone at this restaurant was saying hi to them and knew their names one by one. So he said they go up to the counter, and there were several employees working, and they, looked just immaculate. He said they were almost glowing, like they were well groomed. They had on these new uniforms, and they greeted them, and they knew their names as well. And they said, Jose, welcome to Taco Bell. Like, we're so glad you came here. And he said it was almost like going to a family reunion. So he said he put in his order, and eventually they got their food and they sat down. After about 10 minutes, they're sitting there eating. And Jose kind of starts looking around at these people in the restaurant. And he said he noticed that they seemed to be almost robotic. They were continuously doing the same thing over and over again. And he also noticed that the employees behind the counter, the same thing. There would be a guy, he would walk from the counter all the way to the back line. And then he would walk back again. And he would pick up a tray. And then he would set it down. And he said, it felt like everything was sort of planned out. And he couldn't help but notice that everyone had a smile on their face. Everyone was happy. Everyone seemed so excited. But then they started to hear this sound coming from the back of the restaurant. And he said one of the employees started saying, hello, welcome to Taco Bell. Hello, welcome to Taco Bell. Hello, welcome to Taco Bell. Like he was stuck on repeat, or like he was going haywire. And he said he just kind of was moving back and forth erratically. So after they got done eating, they hurry up and left, and they go back out to the car. But it was the weirdest thing. Jose looks around, and he said there wasn't a single car in the parking lot besides their vehicle. So he couldn't figure out where all these people had come from, because they were out in the middle of nowhere. So they get in their car, they leave, and they make it to Dallas. Well, a couple days later, they end up heading back from Dallas to El Paso. And he said they decided to stop at this same Taco Bell. So they pull off the interstate and they go down this road. But when they get to the location of where this Taco Bell was, it wasn't there. He said it was just a cornfield. There were no Taco Bells around for miles. And still to this day, he has not been able to find that restaurant. So have you ever had a creepy or strange encounter at a restaurant like Taco Bell?
I became friends with the quiet kid at school, and he warned me to stay home from school one day. We called him Charlie Longneck. He was the bottom of Rockmont High's social hierarchy, and everyone knew him, but no one really noticed him. He was always just sort of there. He's too lame for the stoners, too weird for the nerds, the first to get beat up by the jocks, and the last to get picked for dodgeball. He was a pale, gangly mess of a kid. His large head sat atop a skinny neck that was about 3 inches too long, and he was quiet, like uncomfortably quiet. He would speak when called on in class, but that's about it. Yeah, the rest of the time he would just stare with his big watery eyes. And he was my best friend. He kind of just started following me around one day. It was weird at first, but he didn't really bother me at all. He just seemed happy to sit with me at lunch or listen to me vent, and eventually I kind of began enjoying the company. I could tell he enjoyed it too, and after a few months of this, he even began to talk to me. He said, I've been watching for years, observing. I still don't understand. And so I asked, kind of puzzled, understand what? And he said, the kids, and his sort of, nasally trill, he asked, why don't they like me? I just told him people can be jerks, Charlie. They don't like things that are different. And he asked why not. I just shrugged and said people can be animals like that. And he put his long, thin fingers together as if deep in thought and said, animals? Yes. I don't know why, but something about his big hands and dinner plate eyes made me nervous, but I put it out of my mind. Until the following week. Charlie and I were in the cafeteria and he was showing me his science project. He called it a star map. It was basically a big grid of stars and galaxies laid out with all their names and stuff. It's whatever it was important to him. And then Kevin Lackey, D-bag extraordinaire, walked over and dumped a carton of milk on it, and all of his D-bag friends cheered him on. Charlie's project was ruined, the ink running with spilled milk off the table, and I tried to comfort him, but he didn't seem angry. He looked almost relieved, like he'd finally made up his mind about something. As he mopped up the mess, he said to me, "Don't come to school tomorrow, you're a good friend." And I convinced myself that he was joking. I mean, Charlie was weird, but he was harmless. I told him that if I was staying home, he was staying home too. And it was the only time that I ever actually saw him smile. I told my mom that I was sick that night and planned on texting Charlie in the morning. When my mom woke me up with urgent news about the school, I feared the worst. I turned on the TV expecting blood in the hallways and bodies on the ground. Instead, I saw a newsreel of a blinding light cascading from the sky. Rockmont High School and everyone in it had vanished without a trace.
Get comfy, get cozy, spooky, scary story time. So this past weekend, me and my whole family went to a cabin. I had never been to a cabin like that before, so I was pretty excited. I was looking forward to it. Until we got there, and I seen how remote we actually were. So the first night, everybody's excited, right? We all want to sit around the campfire, make s'mores, and tell stories. But everybody wants me to say scary stories, which I'm not up for because behind us is literally the forest. It's pitch black, like you can't see nothing in there. And I know for sure something's lurking in there. Like, I ain't trying to summon anything while we're out here. I don't even know how they get me to say a story, but I started talking about the kids with these eyes. Worst mistake of my life. Right? And I wasn't even like, I was just saying like things that would happen to us. So I'm telling my nephew's girlfriend the story, and me and his girlfriend hear little twigs breaking. I kid you not, it was like if there was like one step and two steps. And after that, silence. We looked at each other, and I looked at everybody else. I'm like, did y'all hear that? Everybody stayed quiet. We all heard it. And there was literally a light. Where we heard those twigs breaking, we would have seen something. If it was an animal or anything, we would have seen it. I was like, okay, enough scary stories. Like, let's wrap this up. They kept saying stories, but we try not to get too crazy into these stories, right? Because literally we're in the middle of nowhere. Like, when I looked at the place where we're at, it's like 20 residents there. Something be happening up in these woods. But later that night, like, I couldn't sleep, honestly, because I was really terrified. Like, I kept, like, playing back in my head, like, what I heard. And just thinking that, like, nobody's around us and how creepy it really is. And I'm thinking, like, if we drive out of here, like, we have to go on those curves and it's pitch black. Like, I mean, everything was just, I was building scenarios in my head. I was just scared. So the next morning when I woke up, I go downstairs and I see a chair on the door, right? Like, holding the knob up. And my son's wide awake. And I'm like, dude, what happened last night? And he starts telling me how in the middle of the night, he seen a big, tall, black shadow run across the window. And these windows had no blinds on them, no curtains, nothing. Like, you could see outside and somebody can see in. And I kept telling him, like, are you sure, like, you weren't, like, falling asleep and you heard something? And he swore up and down, and he does not swear, that he seen a shadow run across. So, was this all coincidence? Like, I mean, the forest is so huge. Like, anything could have been lurking in the forest. But, like, the more I think about it, how we were just out there, like, the creepier these scenarios get in my head.
This is one of several paranormal encounters I've experienced, but it's the one that stayed with me the most. Ever since I was a child, I've been able to see spirits and feel energy around me. I've seen black shadow figures, child apparitions, and even some of my relatives who have passed. But until this moment, I had never heard anything. It happened during the summer of 2018. I was on break helping my mom clean the house, and I had my headphones in while listening to scary stories on YouTube. I was sweeping the floors when right in the middle of the third story, I suddenly felt someone whisper in my ear, "You got to let them in." It wasn't just the words. I felt the warmth of breath on my ear, trailing down my neck. For a second, I thought maybe it was part of the video, something said in the story, but it felt too real. I paused the video and replayed that section, listening closely. The line wasn't there. Still unsure, I restarted the entire thing from the beginning, listening all the way through. Not once did I hear the whisper again. I took off my headphones and just sat on the couch, trying to process it. What did I just hear? Because whatever it wasn't coming from the video. As I sat there, lost in thought, I heard the sound of children outside, playing, laughing. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then the sound got closer. It felt like they were right outside, in my driveway. I got up and looked out the window. That's when I saw 2 children, a boy and a girl, just standing there, staring at me. Something about them wasn't right. They didn't move. They looked like mannequins. The boy was dressed in a white suit. The girl wore a poofy white dress. Both were dressed head to toe in white, like they were wearing First Communion outfits. I froze, unsure of what to do. So I did the only thing that came into mind. I started praying. As soon as I began, they both said, "Thank you," and began walking up the driveway toward the garage. When they reached it, they turned back to look at me one last time and smiled. Then, without hesitation, they walked straight into the garage door and disappeared. I ran after them, opened the garage door, and looked inside, but no one was there. They were gone, vanished into thin air. Ever since that night, I felt uneasy going into the garage. It feels like it could be some kind of portal. The experience was terrifying at first, but over time, I've come to wonder if maybe those kids just needed someone to pray for them. Maybe that was all they were asking for. That was the first and only time I've heard a spirit. I still see them now and then, but I think about those kids often. They will forever be engraved in my mind.
Get your late night snack. This is Last Thread Before Bed, episode 31. This is a little series where I read scary stories from Reddit before I go to bed, and I try not to get nightmares. So boom, let's get into it. So tonight's story is on the subreddit Ghost Stories thread from user Cheesecake Truffle, which would be a good snack for the story. About 20 years ago, my 2 children and I rented an apartment. The apartment was the top floor of a home built in 1910. After a couple of nights, we settled in for some sleep. I thought I was dreaming about my children playing, but woke up due to their noise. Both were asleep. I tried going back to sleep, but the sounds resumed. Footsteps running across my ceiling, giggling, and laughter. The next day, I went to the attic to check things out. Nothing. That night, the sounds resumed. A few days later, I met my downstairs neighbors, so I asked them about it. The whole building was haunted by multiple entities. Their lights would shut off, the sinks would start running, and they'd seen shadow figures. So we just accepted it. My deceased uncle, who'd followed me everywhere, would show up sometimes. Easily discernible, as he's the only one who's ever been able to touch me. During that time, my uncle and grandma would show up in photos. We had no problems with any of them. So you're just used to dealing with shit like this, Cheesecake Truffle. Then we moved into a home I'd bought. While packing, one of them, unrelated to me, managed to pack itself into a box. Yeah, the one that likes to open all the cabinets and drawers in the night. Yeah, you're way too used to this. The one that takes things and hides them. We saw it as a child, so we named it Newt. Now if something goes missing, we kindly ask Newt to return it and wait a few minutes. It'll pop up somewhere obvious. The cats adore Newt as well. And yes, my grandma and uncle are here, but the kids stayed behind. That was awesome. Follow for more scary stories, y'all.
The house was practically new, so nobody could explain what followed us up the stairs. So this took place in Northern California, and I was around 12 years old. It was the same time that my mom was somewhat newly divorced, and she was dating the guy that ended up being my stepdad. So between him, his 4 kids, me, and my little sister, we definitely needed to upgrade. We needed a bigger house. So we moved into a beautiful 4-bedroom house in Northern California, and we were only the second family to live there. Nothing bad had ever happened there, at least that we knew of. But about 5 months into moving there, my mom was working downstairs late in the kitchen. She started to hear some rustling around in the pantry, and so she called out my little sister's name just to see if she could catch one of us, but none of us came, and so she went to actually go and check, and nothing was there, and she just kind of brushed it off and went back to working. A little bit later, my little sister came down the stairs, and she came and watched a movie with my mom. My little sister fell asleep on the couch, and so my mom picked her up and carried her back up the stairs to take her back to bed. As she was walking up the staircase, she could hear right behind her somebody taking footsteps. Every time she'd go up a stair, so would whatever was behind her. Everybody's worst nightmare, right? Like, you never want to have to look behind you when you go up the stairs. Anyway, so she ran the rest of the way up the stairs, and she locked herself in the bedroom. So my mom just convinced herself that she was exhausted. Eventually, she went back to her own bedroom, and then she said about 30 minutes later, my little sister came running to her into her room and telling her that something followed her up the stairs. Neither of them had mentioned it to each other or talked about it together when it was happening. And then nothing happened for about 2 months until one weekend I decided to stay up late by myself watching old Disney movies. And something that I want to say is our couch is kind of faced towards our garage, and our garage door is very heavy. Like, you cannot open it up without it just slamming shut on its own. Like, it doesn't stay open. I figured the most logical thing would be that maybe the big garage door was left open and like a wind was keeping it partially open, so I started to walk over to go and close it, and that's when the door literally came wide open and slammed shut so hard that it shook the house. That was right before I could reach it. I bolted up the stairs, went to my parents' room crying, and told them what happened. Weeks after that, my mom actually installed security cameras, mostly because there were 6 kids and she wanted to know what was going on at night. She called me up to her bedroom one night and she had me watch some security footage of our garage. And the footage only records if it's triggered, and so it was triggered, obviously, by something. The garage was empty, but across the screen was like a few white orbs going back and forth. And I noticed the timestamp, and it was 3:37 a.m., and I want to say that that was around the same time when I heard the garage door a while back opening on its own and then slamming shut. Besides all of that, there were a few other strange things that happened that we couldn't explain. We actually moved not too long after that. Maybe there's a perfectly normal explanation for everything. Maybe we were even just a stressed family adjusting, right? But even to this day, if I hear footsteps behind me going up the stairs, I still will not look behind me.
We are back with another Trini Paranormal Trini Scary Story, Trini Folklore for you today. And you know what yellow alert means? It means perfect weather for a cup of coffee and a little scary story or paranormal experience to warm you up. Now, we have a story and it actually ends a little bit sad, but it's actually very scary. So let's get into it. So, our follower said, "Hi, I have a story for you. This happened by my grandmother's house when we were little. So we lived in Blanchisez, and that's in the North Coast, and my dad used to make coals for barbecue, for sale. So they would dig a huge pit, and they would burn the wood in that pit, and it would be lighted for a few days. Then we had to go out to out it. At the time, I was 9, and my sister was 15 years old. So she was way older than me, and every night at around 10, you would hear children playing and chains dragging around the house. Grandma would always tell us to not go outside and don't look out the window. But one night in particular, we were very curious, and my sister decided to say, let's go outside. It's what we saw was the most scariest thing in my life. It was a goat-like, wolf-like creature with long chains around it, dragging. Since the sighting of the creature, my sister went clinically insane, and she's currently receiving treatment in a psychiatric facility in Trinidad and Tobago. A really tragic ending to that experience, but it is not something unheard of. There's a lot of people who when they see things, it is so scary, it is so unreal that their brain, their spirituality, it can't process it, and it sends them mad, as we like to say it in Trinidad. I mean, very, very sad ending, but let me know, have you all ever seen a creature like that? Or have you ever heard about people seeing paranormal or supernatural things that eventually sent them insane?
Growing up in Appalachia, we were taught 3 rules. Never whistle at night, never look into the trees, and if you hear something, no you didn't. And last summer, I learned why. Scary story time. Every summer since I was a baby, my family and I have traveled to the beautiful state of West Virginia at the end of June for a family reunion. We live in Massachusetts, but the majority of my mom's family lives in the Charleston area. As a kid, we used to stay for a week or more, but now since we are all older, it's more of like a long weekend. Growing up, we were always told and warned about the rules of Appalachia. No whistling, don't look in the trees, and most importantly, if you hear something, no you didn't. And we used to follow these rules to the letter as kids. But as we got older, we started to question them. So every trip down, we would always spend the day at my great aunt's house. As we started to get older, some of my older cousins who used to live at my aunt's house started to tell us different kinds of stories. Not the wholesome, when we were kids stories of something not human. They shared tales of hearing strange rustling at night, weird footprints, dark shadows by the edge of the woods at night, and whole deer carcasses left on the bank of the creek. I never believed them until last summer. Last summer, when we were at my aunt's house, my 3 siblings and I decided to hang out by the creek later than we usually did. We were just having fun times, not even realizing the sun was starting to disappear behind the mountains. Before we knew it, my aunt was calling us up to the porch to come in for the night. We told her we would be right there, but ended up getting stuck into another conversation and stayed down on the creek bank. Eventually, we started to joke on if this mysterious creature really existed or if they were just telling us tall tales. Just as my brother was talking about another Appalachia story, we heard a rustling across the creek in the woods. We tried to squint through the darkness, but we could not see the origin of the noise. We shrugged it off, waving it off as deer or coyote, but the noise never went away. It kept coming closer and closer, till it was coming from the woods directly on the other side of the creek from us. Then it stopped. This made us all quiet down. An uneasy feeling immediately surged through the air, making us feel like we were being watched. It felt like hours went by before a blood-curdling screech tore through the silence. We all scrambled to our feet and sprinted to the porch. As we turned to run, I can hear something splash into the creek. My eldest cousin stands out on the porch and yells at us not to look back and to just keep running. I'm not sure what possessed me to, but I did not heed his warning and turned back around. It was so dark I could not make out many features, just a tall figure with glowing eyes and a blood-stained maw. It felt as if time slowed down when our eyes crossed paths. The creature let out another haunting screech. This definitely broke me out of whatever state I was in, and I continued after my siblings onto the porch. As I was running, I heard deep panting in my ear and multiple sets of footsteps getting closer. As I finally reached the porch, hard pounding, I turned around to see nothing behind me. My cousin just had a half terrified, half I told you so smirk on his face. My siblings and I opted to stay at my aunt's house that night as we were too scared to walk out to our cars. Throughout the night, we heard heavy footsteps outside the window, almost like something was stalking the house. At one point, we even heard scratching at the front door. None of us slept a wink that night. When the early morning birds started to sing, the noises finally stopped. Once the sun came up, we went back out onto the porch to investigate the noises we heard all night. My aunt gasped when she saw the deep scratches on the front door, deeper than any animal in the area was capable of. The grass outside the perimeter of the house was pressed down like something heavy was dragging around the house all night. And down by the edge of the creek was a black bear's carcass torn to shreds. I will never forget what my aunt said next. It was angry last night. No one said anything when my uncle put in a new door and mowed the lawn the next day. We have all yet to talk about that night since, and I don't think we ever will. But I sure will be on that porch every year now as soon as the light bugs emerge. And that's the end of the story. So have you ever experienced anything like this in Appalachia, or do you have an idea of what OP might have encountered? Let me know.
For a long time, I kept these memories buried deep down, but I finally realized it's time to write everything down and let others hear what happened. I'm ready to share a real-life nightmare from my childhood that took place in La Frontera, at the border just after crossing into Mexico. To this day, just thinking about it gives me massive goosebumps. When I was about 4 years old, my dad bought a large 2-story house. It was incredibly cheap, which, looking back, should have been our first red flag. But to him, it seemed like a huge opportunity. We fully furnished it, but there was one strange detail. During that first trip, we never spent a single night there. It just sat there, empty. Years later, my dad wanted us to move there ahead of him while he stayed behind in the US to keep working. So my mom, my brother, and I packed up our lives and crossed the border to move into the house permanently. I still remember the breathless excitement we felt when we pulled up to the driveway. It was the first 2-story house my family had ever lived in. We felt like we were on top of the world, estrenando la casa, enjoying the house for the first time, just laughing and filling those huge empty rooms with our voices. We had absolutely no idea that whatever was already lurking inside those walls was watching us, waiting for the honeymoon phase to end. And it only took a few days for the atmosphere to completely change. The first real horror began on a quiet evening. My brother and I were downstairs watching Edward Scissorhands, while my mom was working in the kitchen. Out of nowhere, a sound broke the silence, coming from right above our heads. Thud, 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 thud. Daisy. It was the distinct, unmistakable sound of sharp high heels sprinting violently across the upstairs floorboards. The footsteps weren't casual at all. They were frantic, heavy, and racing directly toward the opening of the staircase. My brother and I froze, paralyzed by terror. We looked at each other in complete disbelief. Like, are you hearing this right now? We were so confused and terrified. Even my mom stopped what she was doing in the kitchen and stared toward the staircase with us as the sound grew louder and louder. The frantic clicking didn't stop. It reached the top of the stairs and began descending faster and faster, charging down the steps straight toward where we were sitting. Just as the phantom footsteps seemed close enough to step into the living room, the entire house went completely dark. Every single light cut out at once. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. We were completely blind, trapped in the dark with whatever had just run down those steps. Convinced an intruder was about to grab us, my brother and I started panicking. Through the darkness, my mom broke into intense prayer in Spanish.
Want to see something scary? Have you ever heard of a Dybbuk box? No? Let me tell you about it. A Dybbuk actually isn't the name of the box itself. It's the name of the demon it contains. A Dybbuk in Jewish folklore is a disembodied human spirit that, because of horrible sins it committed in its lifetime, wanders the earth until it can possess a human body. This belief was especially present in the 16th and 17th centuries.
6'7",
I'll go. I'll go. I'll leave. Alright, goodbye. Yep.
What am I doing with my life?
And because of medical malpractice and misunderstanding of mental disorders and the uproar of spirituality, many people who were mentally unwell or had disorders were thought to be possessed by one of these spirits and taken in by priests for intense exorcisms. Many are skeptical of the box's reality, and hundreds can be found getting
might have known the story of real-life boogeyman.
Sold on sites like eBay for up to thousands of dollars. But enough true stories originate from these boxes for the idea to have merit. One such story is that of Kelvin Manus. If you are a fan of the show Ghost Hunters, like I am, you may already know the story. Kevin was an antique store owner who back in 2006 bought a vintage wine box, which is just what a Dybbuk box is, from a 130-year-old Holocaust survivor on eBay. He immediately began to have reoccurring nightmares, bad luck, bruises, and frequently smelled the scent of ammonia in his house. So as a result, the box was relisted and landed in the hands of Jackson Hexton, He had the exact same things happen to him and subsequently buried the box underground in Missouri. He stated that the day it arrived, I put my hands on it, and it almost feels like the thing collapses into a liquid state. I felt like a knife was coming into my guy. I was paralyzed in pain. When I go to bed, I have terrible dreams of a hag that seems to come with the box. Many people want to buy the box from him, but he believes it's unethical. Many people want to buy the box from him, but he believes it unethical to sell, and I don't think he's wrong. There have been many other instances of Dybbuk box possessions and misfortune that I may go into on a later date. Although these items interest me, possessing one probably isn't a risk I'd be willing to take. However, if you ever stumble upon a vintage wine box and find yourself having bad luck, probably don't open it.
Not every haunting takes the shape of a ghost. Sometimes it's only a light in the darkness. Today's haunted destination takes us to Parker's Ferry Road near Charleston, South Carolina, home to one of the state's most enduring ghost legends. For generations, locals have spoken of a mysterious light that appears along the lonely road after dark. According to the legend, many years ago, a preacher's young daughter disappeared somewhere in the woods. Night after night, he searched for her, carrying nothing but a lantern to light his way. Then tragedy struck. As he searched near the railroad tracks, he was hit and killed by an oncoming train, never finding his daughter. But some believe his search never ended. People who travel Parker's Ferry Road after sunset have reported seeing a lone light appear in the distance. Some say it slowly drifts towards them. Others claim it follows their vehicle before disappearing into the darkness. Many believe it's the preacher, still searching for the daughter he never found. Others believe there's a more ordinary explanation. But one thing is certain, the legend of the Parker's Ferry Light has endured for generations. So, what do you think? If you saw a lonely lantern glowing on an empty road, would you stop to investigate or keep driving? Travel safely, wanderer, because not every light is meant to be followed.